Hello friends, welcome to a new topic today. In this chapter we are going to learn about cerebrovascular system pharmacology. So in this first we will learn about the first important thing, which is antihypertensives. Okay, so in the antihypertensives, if you see, first we will see the mechanism of how blood pressure is developed, and then we will see each and every drug which can be used to decrease the BP. So first, in the brain, if you see, okay, we have sympathetic nervous system. Whenever, due to any stimuli, whenever the sympathetic nervous system is activated, this will activate two receptors, that is alpha 1 receptor and beta 1 receptor. Whenever alpha 1 receptor is activated, this alpha 1 receptor causes vasoconstriction. Okay, when there is vasoconstriction of peripheral vessels, there is increased peripheral vascular resistance, right? Whereas if beta 1 is activated, this causes increased heart rate, because beta 1 acts on heart, increases the rate of conduction and also increases the force of conduction, so it increases heart rate. So alpha 1 whenever due to stimuli, alpha 1 activation causes vasoconstriction, leading to increased BP. Similarly, beta 1 activation causes increased heart rate and thus increasing BP. Okay, in this way BP is increased. Okay, there are some more ways where BP is increased. The one more way where BP is increased is whenever there is vasodilatation. The stimuli can be anything. Okay, this vasodilatation decreases the blood pressure, right? So we will have to increase the blood pressure. In order to increase the blood pressure, on the JG cells there will be beta 1 receptors. These beta 1 receptors which are present on the JG cells will secrete renin. Okay, once this renin is secreted, this renin will convert angiotensinogen to angiotensin 2. Sorry, angiotensin 1 first. Angiotensin 1, in the presence of angiotensin converting enzyme, it forms angiotensin 2. Okay, this angiotensin 2 will have two effects. One, it acts on angiotensin receptors, AT1 receptors, and this AT1 receptor causes vasoconstriction. That is number one. Second, this angiotensin 2 also activates adrenal gland. What does adrenal gland do? Adrenal gland mineralocorticoid action will get stimulated, and it produces aldosterone. Okay, once this aldosterone is produced, what does aldosterone do? Aldosterone causes sodium and water retention. Okay, because of this sodium and water retention, there will be increased blood volume, and because of this increased blood volume, there will be increased carbon dioxide, thus increased cardiac output, thus causing increased blood pressure. So what is happening at the end? At the end, the final result is increase in BP occurs. Why is there increase in BP? Because of these things. So these are important. Why is increased BP occurs? It is because of increased alpha 1 activity and increased beta 1 activity causing increased BP. Second, because of JG cell beta 1 activity and leading to renin production, this renin converting angiotensinogen to angiotensin during this angiotensin converting enzyme activation, and this angiotensin 2 activating angiotensin receptor 1. Okay, and this angiotensin 2 also activating adrenaline, which is activating aldosterone. Okay, this aldosterone causing sodium and water retention and thus increasing blood volume. This increase in blood volume also increases cardiac output, leading to increased blood pressure. So these are the different stages at which the drugs act. So what are the drugs which are acting here? See, these alpha receptors can be blocked by alpha blockers. These beta receptors can be blocked by beta blockers. Okay, now if you see here, this beta receptor in the JG cells can be blocked by beta blockers. Then renin can be blocked by a drug called as aliskiren. Okay, then angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors are blocked by angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. Then this angiotensin 1 receptor, AT1 receptor, is blocked by angiotensin receptor blockers. Aldosterone is blocked by spironolactone. Okay, then this blood volume is decreased by diuretics by promoting excretion of water and sodium. So these are the different drugs which are used for decreasing blood pressure. So when all these processes are blocked, obviously there will be decreased blood pressure. So first we will see alpha 2 here. From here we will start. Okay, in the alpha 2, first we will see the central sympatholytics. Okay, so first we will see central sympatholytics. So in the central sympatholytics, first we will see alpha 2 agonists. So in the central sympatholytics, the first type of group of drugs which are important here is alpha 2 agonists. Okay, so if you see these alpha 2 agonists, as the name says, these will activate alpha 2 receptors. Whenever these are activating alpha 2 receptors, what are alpha 2 receptors? See, alpha 2 receptors are present in the presynaptic membrane. They are not present in the postsynaptic surface. They are present in the presynaptic surface, and what does they do? These will decrease the sympathetic outflow. These are actually an autoreceptors. So these will decrease noradrenaline, dopamine and 5-hydroxytryptamine. So whenever they decrease these neurotransmitters, okay, this alpha 2 receptors or alpha 2 agonist will decrease noradrenaline, dopamine, 5-HT or 5-hydroxytryptamine, which is serotonin. So this will lead to decreased sympathetic outflow. So decreased sympathetic outflow from vasomotor center, that is from the central nervous system. So because of this decreased vasomotor outflow on the heart, it causes decreased heart rate and decreased cardiac output, leading to decreased BP. In the blood vessel, it decreases the peripheral vascular resistance and it decreases blood pressure. Okay, then what about the pharmacokinetics? If you see pharmacokinetics, these are given orally and they are highly lipid soluble. Because they are highly lipid soluble, they can cross the blood brain barrier, and that is the reason why we call them as central sympatholytics, because they will have to act on the central the vasomotor center which are present in brainstem, that is most commonly medulla. Then these have shorter duration of action, so twice a day administration is necessary. See, this transdermal patch of clonidine can also be worn for a week. Okay, so this is about the pharmacokinetics. Then what are the side effects? If you see, the side effects are very important. The side effects of this clonidine include, there is alpha blockers, so has a result side effects of alpha activators, right? So there is side effects of dryness of eyes, dryness of mouth. There is sedation, depression, bradycardia is seen, postural hypotension, obviously because of decreased BP and decreased heart rate. Prolongation of those effects causes bradycardia and postural hypotension. It also causes nausea and vomiting, impotence, and it causes parotid gland swelling. Okay, so these are the common side effects which you see due to clonidine. Then what are the uses of clonidine? So if you see clonidine, it is a hypertension. It is used as an it is used in hypertension because it decreases blood pressure. Okay, uses are obviously hypertension, and this is also used as withdrawal, used for withdrawal symptoms of especially opioid and alcoholism. Opioid, alcoholism and smoking withdrawal symptoms, you can use this clonidine. It can also be used as anti-diarrheal drug in diabetic mellitus or neuropathy. Main thing is its use is hypertension, and along with that it is used for withdrawal symptoms of opioid and alcoholism and smoking. Next, what happens if we suddenly stop the drug? Sudden stoppage of drug after prolonged use. This will lead to withdrawal syndrome. Sudden stoppage of drug after prolonged use leads to a syndrome which is called as withdrawal syndrome. Okay, so what are the why is this withdrawal syndrome present? Because whenever we give clonidine, there will be increased receptors will be formed, but once you stop the clonidine, then there will be increased sensitivity of receptors. And see, what is clonidine doing? This is stopping the noradrenaline, and if this is the synaptic terminal, what is it doing is whenever it activates alpha 2, so this activation will inhibit this release. Normally these neurotransmitters are released into the synaptic terminal, so this release has been blocked. Okay, so because this release of these neurotransmitters has been blocked, all the neurotransmitters which are formed are now stored in the synaptic terminal, right? So once you stop this drug, stop this alpha 2 activation, once this alpha 2 activation has been stopped, then what happens? These are free to get released. So these increased catecholamines and everything which are produced will release as a burst, and this will lead to the withdrawal symptoms which include headache, nervousness, tachycardia, sweating and tremors. Okay, so it also causes, because of increased release of these neurotransmitters which are sympathomimetic neurotransmitters, this will lead to rebound hypertension. So how are you going to treat this rebound hypertension? This rebound hypertension is treated with the drug phentolamine, is used for the treatment of this rebound hypertension. Okay, then if you see, one important thing is this clonidine should not be given in those patients who have traveling jobs, because of this withdrawal symptom you should not give in those with traveling jobs, and obviously it is relatively safer in pregnancy. And this clonidine is contraindicated with tricyclic antidepressants. So these are the important things about clonidine. Then the next second alpha 2 central sympatholytics or alpha 2 agonists are, the second drug is methyl dopa, alpha methyl dopa. If you see, this alpha methyl dopa is also safe in pregnancy, but this is the drug which is preferred in pregnancy. So if you see, you can use clonidine also in pregnancy, that is also safe in pregnancy. Alpha methyl dopa is also safe in pregnancy, but alpha methyl dopa is preferred in pregnancy. So if you see alpha methyl dopa, this is actually a prodrug. Okay, and it enters the neuron. Once it enters the neuron, it gets converted to alpha methyl dopamine. Okay, this alpha methyl dopamine gets converted to alpha methyl noradrenaline. This alpha methyl noradrenaline now is released in the synapse. Once it is released in the synapse, it has alpha 2 receptors. So this alpha methyl noradrenaline will activate this alpha 2 receptors. Okay, and once this alpha 2 receptor is activated, okay, this will decrease the sympathetic outflow, that is, this will decrease the release of these neurotransmitters are blocked. Actually this alpha 2 will not be here, this is wrongly labeled. This alpha 2 will be here like this in the presynaptic terminal. Okay, so once this alpha 2 is activated, this will inhibit the release of the neurotransmitters, and as a result there is decreased central sympathetic outflow. Whenever there is decreased noradrenaline, noradrenaline, adrenaline, okay, all those sympathetic neurotransmitters, there won't be activation of heart through beta 1 receptors, and as a result there will be decreased heart rate, decreased peripheral vascular resistance, thus decreasing BP. Now what about the side effects? If you see the side effects include mainly, these are very important, these side effects. Remember, these can cause number 1, these can cause sedation. Most common side effect which you see with alpha methyl dopa is sedation, and because of increased prolactin, they increase the secretion of prolactin, thus causing gynecomastia, and because of the increased prolactin they cause impotence also. They will also cause autoimmune hemolytic anemia. This is AIHA, is autoimmune hemolytic anemia, is a side effect of alpha methyl dopa. This alpha methyl dopa is also associated with nightmares. Sometimes hepatitis is also seen as a side effect. So if you see in the alpha methyl dopa, it is preferred in pregnancy. This is the most common side effect is sedation. Okay, it causes gynecomastia, impotence and hepatitis. Okay, then the second drug, so before we go into the next groups of drugs, first we will see what are the antihypertensives which are safer in pregnancy. Antihypertensives which are safer in pregnancy include, number 1, we have labetalol. Labetalol is the drug of choice in pregnancy. Okay, antihypertensive which is safer or drug of choice in pregnancy is labetalol. Okay, the second antihypertensive is alpha methyl dopa, which is safer in pregnancy are labetalol, which is drug of choice, alpha methyl dopa, hydralazine, calcium channel blocker in the dihydropyridines. Okay, and also cardioselective beta blockers. So these are the drugs which are safer in pregnancy. What are they? Again we'll see, labetalol, which is the drug of choice in pregnancy, alpha methyl dopa, hydralazine, okay, cardioselective beta blockers are safer in pregnancy, CCBs, that is calcium channel blockers, are safer in pregnancies. So among all these three, if you see, that is labetalol, methyl dopa and hydralazine, these are mainly used in hypertensive medications. Okay, but with these hypertensive emergencies, for hypertensive emergencies we can use this labetalol, methyl dopa and hydralazine. Okay, so among all this methyl dopa is the drug which is preferred for hypertensive emergencies. Okay, so for hypertensive emergencies you can use labetalol, alpha methyl dopa and hydralazine. Among all this alpha methyl dopa is preferred. Then we have learned what are the drugs which are safe in pregnancy and which can be given in pregnancy. Then what are the drugs which are contraindicated in pregnancy? This list is also important. The drugs which are contraindicated in pregnancy are ACE inhibitors and ARBs, that is angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors, angiotensin receptor blockers, non-selective beta blockers are contraindicated in pregnancy, diuretics, nitroprusside. Okay, ACE inhibitors, ARBs, beta blockers, non-selective beta blockers, diuretics and nitroprussides are the drugs which are contraindicated in pregnancy. Then we have learned everything about clonidine, right? Now what are the drugs which are congeners of clonidine, that is which are derived from clonidine, and they are also central sympatholytics. They are moxonidine, moxonide and rilmenide. Moxonide and rilmenide are the congeners of clonidine. Okay, and these are also central sympatholytics. Remember, these drugs have longer half-life when compared to clonidine. They have longer half-life when compared to clonidine, and they are mainly selective for these receptors, which is imidazoline receptors. These minoxidil and rilmenidine, these are selective for imidazoline receptors and thus modulate alpha 2 receptor activity. So this is about central sympatholytics. The next group of drugs which can be used in hypertension is ganglion blockers. So if you see in the ganglion blockers, we have two drugs. One which is trimethophan, second hexamethonium. In ganglion blockers we have trimethophan and hexamethonium. These two can be used as antidotes in nicotine poisoning. So in the nicotine poisoning we can use antidotes. What are they? Trimethophan and hexamethonium. Okay. The next group of drugs are sympathetic or adrenergic neuron blockers. What are the sympathetic or adrenergic neuron blockers? These sympathetic or adrenergic neuron blockers include, first drug in this is reserpine. Okay, the first drug, what is it? It is reserpine. Where is reserpine seen? This reserpine has been derived from the roots of Rauwolfia serpentina. This is derived from the roots of the plant Rauwolfia serpentina. Okay, now what does this reserpine do? This reserpine will, this is the adrenergic neuron presynaptic, this is postsynaptic. Okay, this reserpine will enter the presynaptic neuron. Okay, and thus this will enter the adrenergic neuron first, and it will bind to the storage vesicle. Normally if you see, tyrosine gets converted to dopa, this dopa gets L-dopa, this dopa gets converted to dopamine. This dopamine enters the norepinephrine through synaptic vesicle. Okay, and this is released outside. Okay, but now what does this reserpine do? Now this reserpine will come and bind to this storage vesicle. Okay, once it gets bind to this storage vesicle, this will inhibit the vesicular catecholamine uptake and storage. Okay, this vesicular catecholamine, noradrenaline and dopamine uptake and storage has been inhibited. That means if you see through this way, see, if you see, this is released, this epinephrine is released, see, norepinephrine is released like this. Once this norepinephrine is released, this norepinephrine will enter the synaptic terminal. In the synaptic terminal, this norepinephrine gets converted to, will get degraded by monoamine oxidases. Okay, monoamine oxidases will degrade this norepinephrine. Okay, and or some of the norepinephrine is degraded, some of the norepinephrine enters back into the synapse. So if you see, some of the norepinephrine is degraded and some of the norepinephrine enters back into the synapse. So I am writing here, this is not, this is wrongly labeled, right? So if you see norepinephrine, once norepinephrine enters the synaptic terminal, from the synaptic terminal it is released outside. Okay, once it is released outside, this norepinephrine in the synapse is either degraded or it is reuptake. Okay, has been done, so that this cycle is maintained. What does this reserpine do? This reserpine will block this process. It combines with this storage vesicle, and it will inhibit the uptake of noradrenaline and storage of noradrenaline. As a result, this noradrenaline which is there, that is destroyed by monoamine oxidase enzyme. Okay, so as a result, the noradrenaline has been decreased. Okay, then what are the side effects of this reserpine? Side effects are, these side effects include, it causes, there is deficiency of serotonin is reported in this reserpine, and as a result it causes mental depression. So because of this mental depression, the patient can land up in suicidal tendencies. This side effect is very important in reserpine. Reserpine causes suicidal tendencies, sedation, and there is sleep disturbance also. What are the other drugs which are in this group? The second drug is guanethidine and bretylium. Guanethidine and bretylium are also have the similar action. They are also so the difference here is, I will just draw it here so that it becomes easier again. So if you see this is the synaptic terminal, okay, this is, sorry, okay, here I'll directly write the vesicle. In this vesicle we have noradrenaline. Okay, now what happens, this noradrenaline in the vesicle, from vesicle it goes outside. Okay, this is the postsynaptic neuron, right? So now if you see this guanethidine and bretylium, these will enter the nerve terminal, okay, and they will replace this noradrenaline. This guanethidine and bretylium, they enter and they will replace it. That means these will go into the synaptic vesicle, okay, and this noradrenaline which is there, this is sent outside. Okay, so what are they actually doing? They are replacing this noradrenaline with this guanethidine and bretylium. Once this is displaced, they will displace this noradrenaline, and as a result this noradrenaline which should be released cannot be released into the synaptic terminal, and as a result it causes decreased blood pressure, right? Then what are the side effects? The main side effect is it causes postural hypotension whenever we use it for prolonged periods. So this guanethidine and bretylium should not be given for prolonged periods. If you see this bretylium is also used as an antiarrhythmic class 3 drugs. It is also used as class 3 antiarrhythmic drugs, this bretylium, okay, and this bretylium has poor oral bioavailability. The next group of drugs which are given is beta blockers. See, classification of beta blockers and everything about beta blockers has been already dealt in ANS. So please look into that lecture. So in the beta blockers, if we see, we have different drugs. So if you see propranolol is the first beta blocker which is effective in hypertension. This is the first beta blocker which is found to be effective in hypertension and ischemic heart disease. Okay, but this is not the most commonly used beta blocker for hypertension. Then we have the second drugs which are metoprolol and atenolol. This metoprolol and atenolol, these are cardioselective beta blockers. That is, they only block beta 1 receptors. They are selective. Because of this selective nature, these are most commonly used beta blockers for hypertension. So you should remember this. So these are most commonly used beta blockers for hypertension. Why? Because they are cardioselective. They block only beta 1 and beta 1 blocking ability only. Then the next drug is labetalol and carvedilol. Okay, what does this labetalol or carvedilol do? These both are actually beta 1 blockers. These labetalol and carvedilol are beta 1 blocker plus alpha 1 blocker. They have beta 1 and alpha 1 blocking activity. What does alpha 1 blocker do? Alpha 1, what does it do? It has alpha 1 is present on the peripheral blood vessels and causes vasoconstriction. Once this alpha 1 receptor is blocked, what does it causes? It causes vasodilatation. So this carvedilol, if you see, this carvedilol is actually preferred beta blocker in heart failure. This carvedilol is a preferred beta blocker in heart failure. Okay, what is the next drug? Next drug is nebivolol. Okay, what does this nebivolol have? This nebivolol has one more action, that is it increases nitric oxide. Because it increases nitrogen oxide, it increases nitric oxide only. This increases nitric oxide. Because it increases nitric oxide, it has the property of vasodilatation. Okay, that is nebivolol. Then the next drug we can use which is a beta blocker is celiprolol. This celiprolol is actually preferred beta blocker in hypertension plus bronchial asthma. If you have to do for hypertension, if you have to use something for hypertension and bronchial asthma, you can use this celiprolol. Okay, then the next drug is esmolol. This esmolol is actually the drug of choice for intraoperative or post-op arrhythmias. So this celiprolol is the drug of choice for intra-op and post-operative hypertension or arrhythmias. Okay, during surgeries you can give esmolol. Why? Because it has shorter half-life and it can easily be metabolized by RBC esterases. Because of this property, having shorter half-life, you can easily, this intraoperative or post-operative hypertension or arrhythmias which the patient has are short-lived. They are temporary, not permanent. They are due to the changes in the metabolic consequences in the body, and because of that, because of these temporary effects, we can give these short-acting beta blocker, that is esmolol. So this is about beta blockers. Then after beta blockers, the next group of drugs which are used in hypertension are alpha blockers. So if you see in the alpha blockers, we can divide the alpha blockers into two types. One, we have non-selective alpha blockers. Second, we have selective alpha 1 blockers. See, non-selective alpha blockers will block both alpha 1 and alpha 2 receptors, and because they block both alpha 1 and alpha 2 receptors, they are non-selective. Okay, so these drugs include phenoxybenzamine and phentolamine. These are phenoxybenzamine and phentolamine. In these both, phenoxybenzamine is an irreversible alpha blocker. Okay, it has the long duration of action and it is irreversible. Remember, this phenoxybenzamine is used as drug of choice for pheochromocytoma. Pheochromocytoma, the drug of choice is phenoxybenzamine. The second drug is phentolamine. This phentolamine is used as drug of choice for cheese reaction and clonidine withdrawal syndrome. Drug of choice for cheese reaction and clonidine withdrawal syndrome is phentolamine. Phentolamine is used as drug of choice for cheese reaction and clonidine withdrawal syndrome. Then we have the next group of drugs which are selective alpha 1 blockers. See, these selective alpha 1 blockers, the drug is prazosin. So because of this selective alpha 1 blocker, it has action on hypertension and benign prostatic hyperplasia. Hypertension plus benign prostatic hyperplasia, in this combination, this prazosin is the drug of choice. It has safe action on diabetes mellitus, coronary artery disease and gout, because it will improve the lipid levels. One more important side effect is it has something called as first dose phenomenon, that is hypotension. Postural hypotension is reported after getting the first dose. Okay, that is after giving first dose, the patient reports postural hypotension. So this is called as prazosin, which is selective alpha 1 blockers. Next, the next group of drugs, if you see, are vasodilators. So in the vasodilators, we have the first vasodilator, which is sodium nitroprusside. So what does this sodium nitroprusside says? As the name says, this has nitro group, so it generates nitric oxide. Once it generates nitric oxide, cyclic GMP is increased. This increased cyclic GMP will cause vasodilatation. This vasodilatation will be present both in arteries and in the veins. Once there is arteriolar vasodilatation, this will decrease peripheral vascular resistance. Obviously, the resistance is due to arteries, right? So arteriolar dilatation leads to decreased peripheral vascular resistance, which will decrease the afterload and thus decreases PP. Whereas if it's venodilatation, whenever the veins in the lower limbs are dilated, all the all the blood which is there, that gets pooled up in the lower limbs, and as a result there is decreased venous return reaches the heart, and thus there is decreased preload. Whenever there is decreased preload, obviously there will be decreased cardiac output. Because of decreased cardiac output, there will be decreased BP. So in this way, this sodium nitroprusside is helpful in decreasing BP. Okay, next, this is an unstable drug. Okay, because it is an unstable drug, it is easily decomposes with light. When you expose to light, it easily decomposes, and as a result, you will have to prepare this sodium nitroprusside as a separate solution fresh every time you administer the patient. Okay, once you have prepared it fresh, while you are administering it IV, the patient, this nitroprusside can get degraded, right? In order to prevent the degradation of nitroprusside while you are injecting it IV, you will have to cover the infusion bottle and also entire drip in black or amber colored paper. You will have to cover the entire equipment where you use this nitroprusside with black or amber color paper, so that light does not enter the bottle. Okay, one important thing which is important here is it has shorter duration of action and it has short half-life. Okay, so because it has short half-life, it can be used in hypertensive emergencies. What are the dosage? The dosage that here we use is we give IV infusion in 1% dextrose, that is we give 0.5 milligrams per kg per minute dosage of sodium nitroprusside. It is rapid acting, obviously shorter duration of action, and it is rapid acting. The dose can be titrated very easily. So these are the important things about sodium nitroprusside. Then even we'll see uses. The uses of sodium nitroprusside, see this sodium nitroprusside, because it is short acting, it can be used as hypertensive emergencies. At present we use it as second line hypertensive emergency and heart failure. It's not first line. In hypertensive emergency heart failure, this is used as second line. Okay, next, what are the side effects? Side effects are very important. So if you see, the side effects include, we have because it causes dilatation of veins and it causes venous pooling in the venous pooling of blood in the lower limbs, and there is decreased blood flow to the heart, that is decreased preload. This will lead to hypotension. Okay, and when you give overdose, what happens is there is decreased blood flow to the heart, there is decreased cardiac output, and as a result there is decreased blood flow to the brain, right? Because of that, the patient develops anorexia and fatigue. Sometimes they also develop nausea, vomiting, disorientation also. So these are the different side effects. One more thing, important thing here is this, whenever we give this as overdose, it causes accumulation of cyanide. Okay, on overdose it will lead to accumulation of cyanide. Because of this accumulation of cyanide, this will lead to the following symptoms like toxic psychosis. Because of this cyanide metabolite, it leads to toxic psychosis, metabolic acidosis also. Okay, this cyanide, okay, this cyanide which is accumulated, this cyanide will combine with the sulfur groups and it leads to the formation of thiocyanate. What does this thiocyanate do? This will decrease or inhibit the thyroxine hormones, and as a result it causes hypothyroidism. So these are the important side effects, very important side effects of sodium nitroprusside. What are they? They cause toxic psychosis, metabolic acidosis and hypothyroidism. Then how are you going to treat this cyanide poisoning? The treatment of this cyanide poisoning is with hydrocobalamine. Hydrocobalamine is the drug which is used for cyanide poisoning. What is it? Hydroxycobalamine is the drug used for cyanide poisoning. Then one more important thing is it is contraindicated with in pregnancy because of this accumulation of cyanide toxicity. Then the next group of antihypertensives are potassium channel openers. So what are the potassium channel openers? We have different types of potassium channel openers. What does these do? Once the potassium channel is opened, if this is the terminal, okay, what is happening here? Here potassium channel is opened. Because of that, the potassium which is in the nerve, it is reaching outside. Okay, it reaches outside. There is potassium efflux, right? Because of this potassium efflux, whenever there is potassium efflux, there is hyperpolarization occurring in the nerve. So because of this hyperpolarization, the blood vessels will relax, thus causing vasodilatation. The first drug in potassium opener is hydralazine. Okay, this hydralazine has two actions. One, it is a potassium opener and it also releases nitric oxide from the endothelium. Okay, one important thing is it is metabolized by cells, that is acetylation. Because it is metabolized by acetylation, there is increased chances of development of drug induced lupus in this patient. That is one, because acetylation, most of the drugs which are metabolized by acetylation have drug induced lupus has side effect, and they also have, because acetylation are the genetically we can divide the whole people in this world into two types. One has slow acetylers, second has fast acetylers. So through acetylation we can so these have the genetically determined effects of slow and fast acetylers. So this hydralazine can be used as hypertensive emergency in pregnancy, and these are also used in congestive heart failure. So hydralazine, if you see, it releases nitric oxide, metabolism by acetylation. It has genetically determined due to slow acetylers and soft acetylers, and because of acetylation there is side effect of drug induced lupus, and the use is hypertensive emergency in pregnancy and congestive heart failure. Then after hydralazine, the next drug which is here is diazoxide. Okay, so what is diazoxide? This diazoxide, if you see, it is a potassium channel opener, as we have said. And one more thing, it will act on, or it will inhibit the beta cell of pancreas. It is actually inhibiting, it is inhibiting the beta cell of pancreas. Because it is inhibiting the beta cell of pancreas, okay, this has resulted in decreased insulin release from the pancreas. Whenever there is decreased insulin release from the pancreas, this leads to hyperglycemia, because glucose cannot enter the cells, thus leading to hyperglycemia. Because it is causing hyperglycemia has side effect, okay, this is contraindicated in diabetes mellitus, because obviously in diabetes mellitus there is in the beginning hyperglycemia state and insulin deficiency. This diazoxide will in turn decrease the insulin furthermore, so we should not give this in diabetes mellitus. And this diazoxide is actually the drug of choice for insulinoma, because of this decreased insulin release. What is insulinoma? Insulinoma is a tumor of pancreas where insulin is released in excess. So as a result here, once because it decreases insulin release, so it is used as a drug of choice for insulinoma. What are the other drugs? The next drug is minoxidil. Minoxidil is the next potassium channel opener. So this minoxidil, if you see, this minoxidil is a prodrug, okay. So in the liver, this minoxidil gets converted into minoxidil sulfate, okay. So this minoxidil is used in the patients with chronic renal failure. This minoxidil is used in the patients with chronic renal failure, because levels are not changed in chronic renal failure. So these minoxidil are used in the in the patients with chronic renal failure. Then if you see, this minoxidil has some side effects. One, it causes abnormal hair growth, and as a result it causes hypertrichosis. Second, it also increases hirsutism, okay. Because of abnormal hair growth, it causes hypertrichosis and it causes hirsutism. Because it causes hirsutism, this is contraindicated and in females. Because it causes hypertrichosis, so it is approved for androgenic alopecia, because in alopecia there is loss of hair and this causes increase in hair. So as a result, it is approved by FDA for androgenic alopecia. Now what are the other side effects? It also causes, because it decreases BP, so reflexly it causes tachycardia. There is reflex tachycardia and there is headache as the side effects. So this is about minoxidil, which is a prodrug. Then the next group of drug is phenoldiazepam, okay. This phenoldiazepam is actually a vasodilator. See, as the name says, this has D, is dopamine, so it is D1 agonist, okay. We can use this phenoldiazepam in either hypertensive emergency you can use, or you can also use it in, this phenoldiazepam can be used either in hypertensive emergency, or you can also use it in post-operative hypertension, okay. Then so the next group of drugs which you see here are calcium channel blockers. So these calcium channel blockers can be divided into two types, okay. One, we have dihydroxypyridines. So the first group of drugs include dihydropyridines, and we have non-dihydropyridines, okay. We have dihydropyridines and non-dihydropyridines. So if you see, we will see each of these in detail. First we will see the drug names. So The dihydropyridines include, we have nifedipine, amlodipine, philodipine, isradipine, nimodipine, clevidipine, clinidipine, okay, clinidipine, nicardipine. Okay, so if you see what are the dihydropyridines you have: nifedipine, amlodipine, philodipine, isradipine, nimodipine, clevidipine, clinidipine and nicardipine. Okay, so these are the dihydropyridines which we have. So in the dihydropyridines, if you see, these, among all these, nifedipine, amlodipine, philodipine and isradipine, if you see, all these are ending with dipines, right? All these have blood vessel smooth muscle action. That is, see, in the blood vessel we have, 1 minute, yeah, this is the blood vessel, right? In the blood vessel we have calcium channel receptor. Okay, because we have calcium channel receptor in this blood vessel, once we give calcium channel blocker, okay, CCBs, these will inhibit this receptor, right? So resulting in vasodilatation. Normally what does calcium do? Calcium causes vasoconstriction, it activates action potential, right? But here, because of blocking of this calcium channel, because of that, this vasoconstriction has been counteracted and there is vasodilatation. Whenever there is vasodilatation, obviously there will be decreased BP. So this is how there is decreased BP in calcium channel blockers. Okay, so this calcium channel blockers, especially these, are called as peripheral calcium channel blockers. Okay, because their action is more on the blood vessels when compared to the heart. Okay, because their action is more on the blood vessels, these for these dihydropyridines, the action is more on the blood vessels more than the heart. We call these as peripheral calcium channel blockers. Okay, that is the reason why we call these as peripheral calcium channel blockers. Okay, next this nimodipine, if you see, this nimodipine is preferred in calcium channel blocker, and it is preferred in subarachnoid hemorrhage. Why? Because it is cardioselective. Nimodipine is a preferred drug. Actually, it is the drug of choice in subarachnoid hemorrhage because of its cerebroselective action of calcium channel blocker. Next, the next group of drugs like clevidipine and clinidipine, these are used in hypertensive emergencies. Clinidipine and clevidipine is used in hypertensive emergencies, and they are nephroprotective. This side effect, this is very important, they are nephroprotective. Then if you see nicardipine, this nicardipine has faster onset of action. Because of this faster onset of action, this is used in hypertensive emergency. So see, if you have if someone has hypertension that is very high, that is around 200 or 210, in such cases we have to have a drug which will decrease the BP very fast, because hypertension is an emergency, right? It might cause many of the complications. So in order to prevent it, we can give this nicardipine, which has faster onset of action. Then we have non-dihydropyridines. So if you see these non-dihydropyridines, the drugs include, we have verapamil and diltiazem. Okay, verapamil is actually the drug of choice in supraventricular tachycardia. What is the drug of choice in supraventricular tachycardia? Verapamil is the drug of choice in supraventricular tachycardia. These non-dihydropyridines are central calcium channel blockers. Why are they central calcium channel blockers? Because their action is present more on the heart more than the blood vessels. Because their action is more on the heart than the blood vessels, so they are called as central dihydropyridines. Whereas these dihydropyridines have more peripheral action, because their action is more on the blood vessels than the heart. Okay, next, the next group of drugs is diuretics. So if you see, the next group of drugs are diuretics. Obviously they cause loss of sodium and water, and thus decrease the blood volume, and thus because of decreased blood volume, there is decreased blood pressure, okay, because of decreased cardiac output. So if you see what is the most preferred diuretic, the most preferred diuretic used in hypertension is thiazide diuretics. Okay, so first we will see all the diuretics in detail. Okay, the first diuretic which is important is we have osmotic diuretics. So the diuretics are of different types. First we have osmotic diuretics. So if you see in this osmotic diuretics, okay, the first drug in the osmotic diuretics is mannitol. Okay, so what is mannitol? If you see mannitol, it has some important properties. This mannitol is, if any drug has to act as osmotic diuretic, it should be freely filtered. Okay, it should not be reabsorbed, it should be freely filtered, it should not be reabsorbed, it should have osmotic property. So these are the important properties which mannitol should have for it to act as osmotic diuretic. Okay, so once you give IV mannitol, think that you have given IV mannitol. Okay, it enters the blood vessels. Okay, in the blood vessels mannitol, that drug is present in the blood vessels. What does this do? This will increase the osmotic pressure in the blood vessels, right? Because this is an osmotic agent, so it increases osmotic pressure in the blood vessels. Once there is increased osmotic pressure in the blood vessels, because of here there is increased osmotic pressure and here there is decreased pressure, so osmotic pressure. So as a result, if you see osmosis, this occurs in reverse, that is the water moves from, that is the solvent moves from lower pressure to higher pressure gradient, right? Lower concentration to higher concentration. So as a result, the water will move from this outside to the inside the blood vessel. Okay, there will be traveling of water from outside to inside, right? Fluid or water means fluid from what is present outside there will be many cells, so there will be a movement of fluid from cells to the blood vessels. Okay, movement of fluid from cells to the blood vessels because of this mannitol. Okay, so as a result, the extra cellular fluid is decreased, so there is increased, all this blood has been increased, right? In the blood all this fluid has been increased. Now this blood from with fluid, it reaches the liver. Okay, once not liver, kidney. Once this fluid with blood vessels, once it reaches the kidney in the renal tubules, okay, so in the renal tubules this has been filtered and it is lost. Okay, so as a result, this will help in removal of fluid from the, so mannitol also gets filtered and it is also lost. So if you see from here, this is the Bowman's capsule. If you see here, these are the glomeruli. Okay, so from the glomerulus there is once the blood with high volume, okay, the high volume blood with lots of water and also mannitol and also osmotic agents, once this reaches the Bowman's capsule and the nephron, now the water gets filtered. Okay, the water gets filtered and along with that even the mannitol will also get filtered. Okay, freely filtered at the glomerulus. So because of that, this glomerulus will directly, this mannitol along with water will reach the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, and then it reaches the distal convoluted tubule and it is excreted. Okay, so here this reabsorption, normally if you see from the PCT, 80 to 90% of solutes and water which are there, they are reabsorbed by PCT, but because of presence of mannitol, which is an osmotic agent, it does not allow the water to get reabsorbed, and as a result the whole water which is present will get excreted in the form of urine along with the mannitol which has been ingested. Okay, so that is osmotic diuretic. Because of the osmotic or property of osmotic pressure property, the water gets lost along with the osmotic agent which has been ingested in the urine. Okay, now where do you see this? This is most commonly seen in proximal convoluted tubule and also loop of Henle. Here in both these, loop of Henle action is major. Then what are the uses of this osmotic diuretic? If you see the uses, these are used in the treatment of number 1, glaucoma. These can be used in the following things. 1, they can be used in the treatment of glaucoma, or cerebral edema, because glaucoma is also due to increased intraocular pressure, right? Increased intraocular pressure due to increased fluid. So this decreases the intraocular pressure. In cerebral edema also there is increased fluid which is accumulated in the cerebral cells, blood cells. So as a result, even that fluid gets lost. So there is decreased intracranial pressure. So it is used in as the treatment for glaucoma and also cerebral edema. It is also used to maintain GFR in impending renal failure. Whenever there is impending renal failure, this is also used to maintain GFR. Okay. Now, what are the contraindications? If you see the contraindications, the most important contraindication here is in acute renal failure. Because why is it contraindicated in acute renal failure? See, the mannitol along with the water is excreted through kidney, right? If this kidney is not just functioning properly, then the mannitol along with this water, fluid which is there, that cannot get excreted, and as a result the pressure on the blood, the cardiac output increases, the blood pressure increases, and this worsens the condition even more. Okay, so you should not give it in acute renal failure. And second, you should not give it in cerebral hemorrhage also. Why is it not given in cerebral hemorrhage? Because it's active cerebral hemorrhage, so this will worsen even more. So it should not be given in active cerebral hemorrhage. Okay, then this oral mannitol which is there, this is if you give mannitol orally. So if you give IV mannitol, that is the action. If you give orally this the same mannitol, this will cause osmotic diarrhea. Okay, it will cause osmotic diarrhea. Then not only we have mannitol, we have other osmotic agents also, osmotic diuretics also. The other osmotic diuretics which can also be used are, we have isosorbide and glycerol. These also isosorbide and glycerol are the osmotic diuretics which are actually given orally. Okay, because of this oral usage, these can be used in glaucoma and also cerebral edema, but we don't use them more often. We use mannitol very often, especially in cerebral edema and glaucoma. Okay, next, the next group of drugs are those which act on proximal convoluted tubule, that is diuretics acting on proximal convoluted tubule. If you see the diuretics which are acting on proximal convoluted tubule, the first group of drugs are carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. Okay, so what is this pathway? See, this is the proximal convoluted tubule. Here normally, first I will tell you the normal mechanism. Normally what happens is, this is the lumen. Okay, this is the nephron lumen. What is this? This is the blood. Okay, this is the nephron lumen and this is the blood, and this is the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, so what does this end called? This end is called as basolateral membrane. So this is basolateral membrane. This membrane towards the side of the lumen of nephron, we call it as apical membrane. Okay, so the first in this lumen, in the nephron, we have sodium bicarbonate. This sodium bicarbonate gets divided into sodium and bicarbonate. Okay, this helps in this sodium gets absorbed while in exchange with H plus, that is proton, hydrogen ion. In this has a name which is sodium. This antiport, we have a name for it, which is, this is called as sodium hydrogen antiport. Okay, so with the help of this sodium hydrogen antiport, okay, this sodium gets absorbed and potassium and H plus is secreted. Okay, this sodium is absorbed through the basolateral membrane into the blood. Okay, while sodium is absorbed by this H plus is derived from the cleavage of H2CO3 into HCO3 minus and H plus. This HCO3 minus will go to the blood, is get absorbed along with sodium. Okay, this HCO3 minus we get it from H2O and CO2 which get absorbed. So in this way, this bicarbonate is also absorbed. If you see, this bicarbonate is absorbed through this pathway. See, this bicarbonate, once it gets separated from sodium, okay, it combines with H plus and it forms H2CO3. This H2CO3, in the presence of the enzyme carbonic anhydrase, it forms H2O and CO2. This H2O and CO2 are absorbed into the cell, and in the cell again, in the presence of carbonic anhydrase, they get converted and again they get cleaved to HCO3 minus and H plus, where this H plus is HCO3 minus is absorbed, whereas this H plus ion enters the lumen again for in order to absorb the next bicarbonate ion. So this is a cycle for absorption of sodium and bicarbonate. Okay, for this cycle H plus is a transporter which is used. Okay, so this so if you see, this H plus is a carrier which is helping in absorption of both sodium and bicarbonate. So if we use carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, obviously this absorption of sodium and bicarbonate has been stopped. So as a result, the sodium and bicarbonate can be excreted in the urine. So that is what happening. Sodium and bicarbonate are lost in the urine. When sodium is lost, then it is fine. When this bicarbonate is lost, this loss of bicarbonate is in the urine. Bicarbonate is nothing but it represents alkalosis. So this bicarbonate is lost. So this leads to urinary alkalosis. But H plus is remained. This H plus which is secreted, this has been remained. So because this H plus has been present in our body, so it causes metabolic acidosis. Acidosis because of H plus ion, and metabolic because it is occurring in the kidney. Okay, so we call it as metabolic acidosis. Okay, and in the in the PCT. Okay, in the DCT also there is less absorption of sodium occurs in the DCT also. So this is what's seen in carbonic anhydrase. Okay, inhibitors. So what are the carbonic anhydrase inhibitors that we see? So we will learn them in detail. So see, in this DCT also, this absorption of sodium and potassium occurs in the DCT with the help of sodium potassium antipode or sodium potassium ATPase. Antipode, it's not ATPase. Okay, in the presence of sodium potassium antipode, there will be absorption of this sodium and secretion of potassium, but this will also be decreased, because why is it decreased? Because see, if there are many sodium, okay, it can absorb. Say if there are 140, normally think that it absorbs some 50 sodium and secretes 50 potassium. Okay, this sodium potassium antipode, it is absorbing 50 sodium and secreting 50 potassium. Okay, during this time, if you see, there is 50 potassium are lost. Okay, that is its capacity, but you are giving, because the sodium which has to be absorbed, obviously 95% of sodium is absorbed in PCT. Okay, but now this absorption has been stopped completely. So instead of 50, almost think that 500 sodium have come here. So it can increase its capacity to around 150 or 200, but the rest 300 sodium which are there, these are lost, right? So sodium, so because of that, this will work as much as possible to its highest capacity, it will work, and because of that there is loss of potassium, and that is causing hypokalemia as a side effect in this carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. Okay, yeah. So if you see, this is the side effect. What is the side effect? The side effect is hypokalemia. Then what are the other side effects? Other side effects are, this can also cause bone marrow suppression. Okay, as I have already said, it causes urinary alkalosis, and because of H plus retention, it causes metabolic acidosis. I told you about hypokalemia. What is it contraindicated? These drugs are contraindicated in liver failure, because they can induce something called as hepatic coma. Why? See, we have ammonia. Okay, this ammonia is actually, it gets converted to urea. Okay, in the liver this conversion of ammonia to urea occurs, but now this liver has been damaged because of liver failure. So as a result, ammonia is present in excess. It is present a lot more than normally, which should be present, but it is present more. Okay, because this ammonia is present in excess, so this ammonia can cross blood-brain barrier and it enters the brain, and in the brain it causes encephalopathy. Okay, that is fine. One. Second, this ammonia which is present in H plus excess, and remember this H plus is also excess, right, because there is metabolic acidosis. So this H plus which is in excess combines with this ammonia and it forms ammonium ion, that is NH4 plus. Okay, this ammonium ion can easily get reabsorbed again, so there is increased ammonia again. Okay, so as a result, because of this increased ammonia. So this increases the ammonia levels more and more, and this will induce more hepatic coma. Okay, so this is about the why this acetazolamide induces hepatic coma. Next, what are the examples of these as carbonic anhydrase inhibitors? The examples of these, the drugs which are carbonic anhydrase inhibitors are acetazolamide, dorzolamide, brinzolamide, dichlorphenamide, midazolamide. Okay, acetazolamide, dorzolamide, brinzolamide, dichlorphenamide and midazolamide. So what are the uses of this drugs? The uses are, these are used to so the uses include these are used in glaucoma. Okay, carbonic anhydrase inhibitors are used in glaucoma. They can decrease the seizure threshold, because of that, sorry, they can be used in epilepsy. Okay, they are used in glaucoma, they decrease seizure threshold, so they can be used in epilepsy. They are also used in mountain sickness. Okay, and they are used to alkalinize the urine, because they are alkalinizing the urine, right? By excretion of bicarbonate, urine is alkalinized, so they are used to alkalinize the urine. So these are the uses of these carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. These carbonic anhydrase inhibitors also inhibit the secretion of bicarbonate by choroid plexus. Because they inhibit the secretion of bicarbonate by choroid plexus, they cause something called as CSF acidosis, right? See, the same process which I have said, 1 minute, I'll show you the process. Yeah, this same process, imagine that this is not nephron and now it is cerebral cell, any CNS cell. Okay, any cell in the cerebrum. Okay, if the same process occurs, just think that the same process is occurring, and because of that, that bicarbonate which is there, okay, because of this carbonic anhydrase inhibitors which are there, this bicarbonate is being very good, it has been excreted or does whatever it wants. Then what is left here? This H plus is left here, right? So if this H plus is left, this H plus which is there, think that this H plus is left in the cell, right? Once this H plus is left, what does this H plus do? This H plus will cause acidosis, right? Where is this H plus left? This is CSF, right? Because obviously this should be CSF. If this is the cerebral cell, this should be CSF. So this acidosis or H plus is present in CSF. So this causes CSF acidosis. So whenever there is increased H plus in CSF, what happens? There are respiratory centers which are present in medulla. Okay, these respiratory centers get activated. These respiratory centers will say our lungs, you should excrete more carbon dioxide along with this H plus, because in my brain H plus is increasing, right? So this causes hyperventilation, leading to increased carbon dioxide exhalation, leading to hypocapnia. Okay, so this is the mechanism by which this occurs. I'll just show you the one which I wrote. Okay, so if you see here, it causes hyperventilation leading to carbon dioxide washout. Next, if you see, then what happens? One more important thing, if you see here, this carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, among all these diuretics, it causes maximum hypokalemia. Okay, then what is the next group of drugs? Next group of diuretics are diuretics acting on loop of Henle. So the diuretics which are acting on loop of Henle include, the first diuretic is loop diuretics are called as sodium potassium ATPase inhibitors. So this is the ascending limb of loop of Henle cell. Okay, what do you see in this cell? In this cell, if you see, this is the loop of Henle, and here we have two transporters, one which is sodium potassium 2 chloride transporter. Okay, and through this sodium potassium 2 chloride transporter, there is absorption of two sodium, one sodium, one potassium and 2 chloride, as the name says. Okay, once this get absorbed, this sodium is completely absorbed through the basolateral membrane into the blood. Okay, whereas this potassium which is there, it is present in the blood, and for the absorption of sodium here in the basolateral surface, we require sodium potassium ATPase, and as a result, this potassium reaches the loop of Henle cell. So this potassium and this potassium, so as a result there is increased potassium in the cell. So this potassium is lost in the again in the lumen, to the lumen by potassium, and this chloride is also lost, that is potassium chloride symporter helps in loss of potassium and chloride. So what is happening? So that is this is the thing. So this is the mechanism for absorption of mainly sodium and excretion of potassium and chloride, right? Now what happens? Now we have given loop diuretics. So this whole process is lost. Because this whole process is lost, sodium, potassium, chloride, all these gets excreted. Because of that there will be hyponatremia, hypokalemia and hypochloremia. Okay, so this is the main side effects which you see in loop diuretics. So I think you understood something about loop diuretics. Okay, whereas magnesium, calcium, these will go through paracellularly. Paracellularly is the space present between the two cells of loop of Henle. Through this space magnesium and chloride escape. Okay, then the same thing I wrote in the sentence form. So loop diuretics will inhibit sodium, potassium and 2 chloride symporter, and thus these will result in loss of sodium, potassium and chloride in the cell. So they will cause loss of sodium, potassium and chloride. Now this sodium reaches the distal convoluted tubule. Okay, from the loop of Henle it reaches the distal convoluted tubule. In the distal convoluted tubule, more and more, it's a similar property, more and more sodium enters it. And in the distal convoluted tubule we have sodium potassium pump which helps in absorption of sodium and excretion of potassium, and we also have sodium hydrogen pump which helps in absorption of sodium and excretion of potassium, right? Now because of increased sodium, this can absorb some amount of sodium. Okay, 1 or 2 it will mean some percentage it will absorb, but the remaining percentage of sodium are lost in the urine. Okay, so during this time there is also potassium, because it uses to its full extent. So potassium is lost in the urine and H plus are also lost in the urine. So this thing you should remember. So because of excretion of potassium we have the side effect, that is hypokalemia occurs, and because of excretion of hydrogen we get alkalosis. Okay, obviously there is excretion of hydrogen, so in the urine there is more hydrogen. So in our blood what is more? In our blood there is increased bicarbonate, so that causes metabolic alkalosis. Why we call it metabolic? Because here kidney is the thing which is involved. Okay, there is one more action. See, these loop diuretics also inhibit, these loop diuretics will also inhibit carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. They have weak action of carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. So thus they excrete bicarbonate also. But there is one loop diuretic which does not have carbonic anhydrase activity. So that is ethacrynic acid. So because of that, this ethacrynic acid have no excretion of bicarbonate. Okay, normally there is excretion of bicarbonate, but in this ethacrynic acid there is no excretion of bicarbonate. Next, what does this loop diuretics do? I said they will decrease sodium and water absorption in the PCT, right? So as a result, what is happening is in the renal, in the kidney, the things that should happen normally are not happening properly, right? So intrarenal hemodynamics has been changed, has been disturbed, and as a result there is release of these prostaglandins. Okay, release of these prostaglandins occurs. So NSAIDs will inhibit these prostaglandins. Okay, once these NSAIDs inhibit these prostaglandins, and thus they will increase the diuretic effect. Okay, so there is release of prostaglandins occurs due to loop diuretics. Next, we will learn about the drugs now. We have the following drugs: 1. Furosemide, torsemide, bumetanide, ethacrynic acid, axocimide, pyretenide, trypamide, mersalil. So all these are the drugs which are loop diuretics. So what are the important points about it? Furosemide. This furosemide, if you see these loop diuretics excrete large amounts of water, large amounts of sodium. They help in excretion of large amounts of sodium and water. So as a result, because of these of their more potent action, they provide quick relief in pulmonary edema and left ventricular failure. Okay, then torsemide is the drug which has the longest half-life. Among all these drugs, the longest half-life is present for torsemide, and bumetanide is most potent loop diuretics. Torsemide has longest half-life. Bumetanide is most potent loop diuretics, and it has lesser side effects are present in bumetanide. Okay. Then we have ethacrenic acid. Ethacrenic acid has highest ototoxicity, has side effect. If you say ethacrenic acid, it has the side effect of having highest ototoxicity, and it has steep dose response curve. So these are the important points of the specific loop diuretics. So now if you see, as I have already said, they have large amount of, they are most high ceiling, right? They have more potent, so they have maximum natriuretic effect among all the diuretics. They are faster acting. Within around 30 to 40 minutes, they easily flush out the water or sodium which is present in the body. Okay. They also maintain the difference between difference in the osmotic pressure in the cortex and the medulla. See, if you see, normally what happens is, if this is the kidney, normally what actually happens is, this is kidney, this is cortex, and this is medulla, right? In the cortex and medulla there is osmotic difference. Okay, this osmotic difference in cortex and medulla is maintained normally, and that is called as, that is given a name which is corticomedullary osmotic pressure. I have already dealt about this in the physiology topic, please look into it. Okay, so this is corticomedullary osmotic pressure. So now this corticomedullary osmotic pressure is there normally. So this corticomedullary osmotic pressure is responsible for absorption of sodium in descending limb of loop of Henle, and reabsorption of salts, that is sodium and chloride, in from ascending limb of loop of Henle. Okay, this is nothing but counter current mechanism. You remember that, right? So for this counter current mechanism to occur, we require this osmotic pressure, right? Whenever we use these loop diuretics, now what does these loop diuretics do? These loop diuretics will abolish this corticomedullary osmotic pressure difference. So once this corticomedullary osmotic pressure difference is lost, okay, because of this corticomedullary pressure difference lossage, there is free water which is cleared easily. Because see, when this corticomedullary osmotic pressure difference is not there, then what is not there? There is no absorption of water from the descending limb of loop of Henle. Similarly, there is no reabsorption of salt also from ascending limb of loop of Henle. Because there is no absorption of water and reabsorption of salt from the loop of Henle, right? So the water which is there, which is excreted in the urine directly. Okay, so this water which is excreted in the urine directly through solutes, that is isoosmotically, is called as free water clearance. Okay, now what are the other uses? If you see the other uses include, we have renal, hepatic. We can use this in renal, hepatic and cardiac disease, or in any disease where there is edema, and to remove the edema you can use this high ceiling diuretics. So it can be used in pulmonary edema IV. And one more important thing is, it can also be used in hyperkalemia, because it's simple, it leads to lossage of calcium, right? It flushes out the calcium in our body. So you can use this in hypercalcemia also. Now what are the side effects? Side effects are, because of loss of sodium potassium chloride, first it causes hypokalemia, hyponatremia, okay, metabolic alkalosis, okay, there is also loss of calcium, so it causes hypocalcemia and hypomagnesemia also. Okay, it also causes hypocalcemia and hypomagnesemia also. It also causes hyperglycemia and dyslipidemia. So this drug is contraindicated in diabetes mellitus. Okay, it causes hyperuricemia. So because of this hyperuricemia action, this is contraindicated in gout. Okay, so these drugs are actually contraindicated in diabetes mellitus and contraindicated in gout. And because of this hypocalcemia, they are contraindicated in renal stones, because in renal stones there is loss of calcium in urine, right? And they are also contraindicated in hypocalcemia, because it increases the hypocalcemic action. So this is about the diuretics. Then if you see, one more important thing is, the one more contraindication or avoiding situation is furosemide and bemetanide. These are actually chemically similar to sulfonamides. They have chemical similarity with sulfonamides, and because of their similarity they are avoided to patients with allergy to sulfonamides. So they are almost similar to sulfonamides, and because of their similar action they are actually avoided in patients with allergy to sulfonamides. Then we have, let us learn about the drugs. Let us learn about the drugs which are acting on distal tubules and collecting ducts. The drugs which are acting on distal tubules and collecting ducts include, the first drug is thiazide diuretics. So where does thiazide diuretic act? This acts on distal tubule, okay, and the main transporter is sodium chloride symporter. Okay, so this is called as sodium chloride symporter, and what does this do? This will result in absorption of sodium and chloride from the lumen to the blood. Okay, so first sodium and chloride gets absorbed into the cell, and this sodium gets absorbed into the blood by crossing the basolateral membrane through the transporter which is present, which is sodium and potassium antiporter, or sodium and potassium ATPase. Okay, and this chlorine easily through its chloride channels, it enters the blood vessel, or it is absorbed. Okay, so after learning all this, if this thiazide diuretic is given, what does this thiazide diuretic do? This thiazide diuretic will inhibit this absorption of sodium and chloride, and as a result there is excretion of sodium and excretion of chloride. Okay, so this is the mechanism of action of thiazide diuretic. Okay, there is excretion of chloride and sodium. So once there is loss of sodium and chloride, so what are the side effects which you see here? The main side effect is loss of sodium, so there will be hyponatremia. Loss of chloride, so there will be hypochloremia. Then if you see, this also causes hypokalemia also, and even alkalosis. Now the question is, why is there hypokalemia and why is there alkalosis, right? See, what is actually happening is, this is in the distal tubule, right? Again, this sodium is increasingly entering the urine. So if this is in the distal tubule, you will have even more tubule, that is, you have collecting duct. Okay, you might have even some more distal tubules, right? Some more cells in the distal tubule. So once more and more sodium enters the cell in the distal tubule or collecting duct. So think that this is the tubule which is distal most to that tubule, to the previous tubule which I have said. Okay, so there is increased sodium which is in the urine now. So this increased sodium will get absorbed by maximum capacity with the help of sodium potassium antiport. Okay, it absorbs maximally and it produces lots and lots potassium, but still some amount of sodium is excreted, because if you see, more amount of sodium should be reabsorbed by the proximal part, but because its capacity is less, so sodium is excreted, and along with that this potassium is also excreted. With the similar mechanism, even H plus gets excreted. Okay, when this H plus gets excreted, what is present in the blood? HCO3 will be present in excess, right? So because excretion of H plus results in increased HCO3 in the blood, this causes this alkalosis. Okay, so I think you understood why there is alkalosis, why there is hypokalemia. Okay, next, the next thing is, it will also cause hyperglycemia and dyslipidemia. Because of this hyperglycemia and dyslipidemia, it is contraindicated in diabetes mellitus. Then this also causes hyperuricemia, so it is contraindicated in gout. These are almost similar to the thiazide loop diuretics which we have seen. This also causes this also has a side effect which is called as erectile dysfunction, especially if this is given with other antihypertensives. This erectile dysfunction symptom increases. Okay, So here there is one more thing, is there is increased positive clearance, free water clearance. Why there is positive free water clearance? It is simple, there is loss of sodium along with the solutes. So as a result, free water is lost along with the solute, so that is positive free water clearance, because there is no change in the osmotic concentration of water. Okay. Next, let us learn about the drugs now. So if you see, the drugs of thiazide diuretics include, we have chlorothiazide, chlorthalidone, dichloromethazide, polythiazide, metolazone, indapamide. So these are the different drugs which you see: chlorothiazide, chlorthalidone, trichloromethazide, polythiazide, metolazone and indapamide. Okay, what does these drugs do? If you see chlorothiazide, what is its action? This chlorothiazide has minimum potency and efficacy among all the thiazide diuretics. Chlorthalidone has longest acting. It's easier to remember. Chlorthalidone, L for longest acting. Chlorthalidone, which has the longest acting among all thiazide diuretics. Trichloromethazide and polythiazide have most potent, because you can remember like this, tri and poly, so it is more potent. Okay, all these are only one, but here there is tri is added and poly is added, so it is more potent. Okay, like that you can remember. Then if you see this metolazone, this metolazone is used in severe renal failure. Metolazone is used in severe renal failure. If you see this indapamide, indapamide has no carbonic anhydrase activity and it has additional vasodilator property, and thus it can be used as antihypertensive drug, because its antihypertensive drug precedes the natriuretic action. See, all these thiazide diuretics also have some amount of carbonic anhydrase activity, but this indapamide does not have this additional carbonic anhydrase function which is present in all the other thiazide diuretics. Okay, so we have learned about the drugs and their special properties. Now let us learn about the uses. So if you see, in the uses we have the first line. These drugs, the first line uses, they are first line used as antihypertensive drugs. Okay, if any hypertensive patient goes to the hospital, he will be definitely given this thiazide diuretic, at least one thiazide diuretic. And these are also used in mild to moderate heart failure. These are used in antihypertension and mild to moderate heart failure. See, they will decrease the urine output by excretion of sodium and water along with some solutes also. So as a result, they can be used in diabetes insipidus. They also decrease the calcium excretion in the kidney. So they will cause hyperuricemia and recurrent stone formation. Okay, one thing, I'm sorry. Oh, it's not going off. 1 minute. Just a minute. Yeah. If you see, I'm really sorry. This is one of the side effect. Okay. So this these thiazide diuretics will decrease calcium excretion from the kidney, and as a result they will result in, okay, they decrease the calcium excretion in the kidney, and thus they will result in hypercalcemia in our body. Okay, because of increased that is a side effect. I'm really sorry, I got confused. Just a minute. See, this thiazide diuretics will decrease the calcium excretion in the kidney. Okay, because they decrease the calcium excretion in the kidney, they cause hypercalcemia or has side effect. They can cause hypercalcemia, has side effect, and this property of decreased calcium in the kidney is used in hypercalciuria and recurrent stone formation. Why is there recurrent stone formation or hypercalciuria? Because this recurrent hypercalciuria will lead to recurrent stone formation. Whenever these will decrease the calcium excretion in the kidney, so this hypercalciuria has been tackled, right? So these will cause recurrent stone formation. Why? Because once in the kidney, lots of calcium gets excreted, all this calcium might combine together and they form stone formation, right? So they can result in stone formation. So these thiazide diuretics can also be used for recurrent stone formation and hypercalciuria. Then then let us learn about the drug interactions. Drug interactions, if you see, these thiazide or loop diuretics, these will increase the digitalis toxicity. Number one, they will increase the digitalis toxicity because they cause hypokalemia, right? These thiazide and loop diuretics causes hypokalemia and they cause hypomagnesemia. This hypokalemia and hypomagnesemia will aggravate the digitalis toxicity, and as a result, these thiazide and loop diuretics indirectly increase digitalis toxicity. Then never and never combine loop diuretics and aminoglycosides, because loop diuretics by itself has increased chances of nephrotoxicity and ototoxicity. If you combine this loop diuretics with aminoglycosides, there is increased chance of nephrotoxicity and ototoxicity. This lithium is combined with diuretics. If lithium is combined with diuretics, it causes lithium toxicity. Okay, these are the drug interactions. The next, if you see, we have the next group of drugs, which are potassium sparing diuretics. These potassium sparing diuretics acts on distal tubule and collecting duct lumen. Okay, these potassium sparing diuretics acts on distal tubule and collecting duct lumen. Now what does this potassium sparing diuretics do? See, this is the epithelial sodium channel, right? Normally we have this epithelial sodium channel. This normally through this epithelial sodium channel, sodium gets absorbed. But once these potassium sparing diuretics will inhibit this epithelial sodium channel. Okay, because they inhibit this epithelial sodium channel, this sodium which is absorbed is lost in the urine. Okay, this sodium which is absorbed is lost in the urine now because of this action. Okay, so there is loss of sodium. And if you see this potassium, why is there excretion? Why is there excretion of potassium? See, the main process here, how this acts is, there is aldosterone which is secreted from the adrenal cortex. Adrenal cortex, in that the mineralocorticoid cells in the adrenal cortex, they secrete this aldosterone. This aldosterone causes sodium. This activates these epithelial sodium channels and increases the absorption of sodium. Whereas similarly, they will inhibit or cause potassium excretion with the help of this potassium channels. Okay, so because of that, they will cause epithelial sodium excretion and potassium absorption. These both occur simultaneously. Once we inhibit this epithelial sodium channels, this sodium absorption has been lost, right? Along with that, even this potassium excretion which should happen will not happen. So as a result, there is increased potassium in the blood, right? That is preservation of potassium, and there is increased sodium lost in the urine, right? So this is called as potassium sparing diuretics. See, if you remember all the diuretics which we have seen, loop diuretics or thiazide diuretics, or even if you see the carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, so all these will cause loss of potassium in the urine. But this is the only type of diuretics which are potassium sparing diuretics which will cause potassium to be preserved. Okay, so this is how this epithelial sodium channel acts and why the potassium is preserved. So if you see this potassium here, there is loss of, here we have loss of sodium occurs and there is preservation of potassium occurs. So what are the drugs which are seen in epithelial sodium channels? Which are seen in potassium channel for potassium sparing diuretics? They are amiloride, tramterene, pentamidine and high dose trimethophan. Okay, so if you see amiloride, if you see this amiloride, it is most potent and longer acting among all the following. amiloride is more potent and longer acting. Okay, this triamterene, and this amiloride is also, it also decreases the sodium and calcium excretion, and it increases the urate excretion. Okay, it decreases, not only decreases potassium excretion, but it also decreases magnesium and calcium excretion, and it increases urate excretion. It can be used as aerosol also to decrease the secretions in cystic fibrosis. This amiloride is also used as drug of choice in lithium induced diabetes insipidus. Okay, then let us learn about triamterene. So if you see this triamterene has following side effects. Most important side effects you should not miss. The triamterene causes photosensitivity, and it causes impairment of glucose tolerance. So triamterene causes photosensitivity, and it also causes impairment of glucose tolerance. It also causes interstitial nephritis and renal stones. So because of these side effects, this triamterene is not used generally. It is less used commonly. Okay, then this triamterene has one more side effect, which is it is weak folic acid antagonist, and as a result it causes megaloblastic anemia. This megaloblastic anemia is actually precipitated in cirrhotic patients. So in triamterene, what are the side effects? It causes photosensitivity, impairment of glucose tolerance, interstitial nephritis, renal stones, and it also causes megaloblastic anemia. Okay, this trimethophan, if you see, high dose trimethophan, this is used for nemocysteine. Okay, so these are the different side effects and uses of these potassium sparing diuretics. Then the next group of drugs are aldosterone antagonists. So this is the mechanism which I have said now in the just before, right? So if you see, this is aldosterone. Okay, normally aldosterone, with the presence of this aldosterone receptors, it activates these aldosterone receptors. So these aldosterone receptors will activate this epithelial sodium channels and thus causes sodium absorption, whereas these aldosterone receptors will inhibit these potassium channels and thus will cause potassium excretion. Okay, now because of that, what does this aldosterone cause? Sodium absorption and potassium excretion. Now what are we doing? We are giving these aldosterone antagonists which will block this aldosterone itself. So as a result, the sodium is excreted and the potassium which is there, this is reabsorbed. Okay, so that is what happens whenever we give aldosterone antagonists. So now if you see, these are doing two actions, one causing loss of sodium and absorption of potassium. Now there is aldosterone antagonists are these. Okay, when you give aldosterone antagonists with ACE inhibitors, see, aldosterone antagonist by itself causing absorption of potassium, and because of absorption of potassium they are increasing potassium in the blood, causing hyperkalemia, whereas these ACE inhibitors also cause hyperkalemia. Whenever you give potassium supplements, obviously you are giving potassium to the blood by IV or oral route. So all these will precipitate this hyperkalemia. Okay, you should not give these together. And remember, with this hyperkalemia, you should not even give digitalis with this. Why? Digitalis, the side effects of digitalis are precipitated with hyperkalemia. Okay, so this is interactions which you have to remember. Then if you see, what are the drugs which are aldosterone antagonists? They are spironolactone, and we have canrenone, we have spironolactone, canrenone, potassium canreonate, and eplerenone. We have 4 drugs which are spironolactone, canrenone, then we have potassium canreonone, then we have eplerenone. Okay, this spironolactone, if you see, this spironolactone increases potassium excretion. Sorry, it increases calcium excretion also, and this spironolactone will also gets converted into canreonone in liver. This spironolactone has anti-androgenic action. So this spironolactone, because of its anti-androgenic action, because it is competitive antagonist at the receptors of testosterone, so because of this testosterone receptors competitive antagonist, this is used in hirsutism. Okay, why hirsutism? Because in hirsutism the major thing is it occurs because of increased testosterone. increased testosterone will result in hirsutism. So if you give these anti-androgen drugs, so this spironolactone, this will block this testosterone, and as a result this hirsutism can be cured. So you can give spironolactone for the treatment of hirsutism. Then if you see in eplerenone causes side effects of hyperkalemia and GI disorders. Okay, so what are the uses of these drugs? If you see the uses of these drugs can be used in, these are weak diuretics, so these should always be used along with either thiazide diuretics or loop diuretics. Okay, in order to counteract the potassium loss, because they by itself are weak diuretics. So they are used in congestive heart failure, hypertension or cirrhotic edema along with the thiazide diuretics. But among all this, the one important thing is this is diuretic of choice in cirrhotic edema is spironolactone. This thing you should remember. So in spironolactone, the diuretic of choice is diuretic of choice in cirrhotic edema is spironolactone. Now let us learn about the side effects. So if you see these side effect profiles, spironolactone, see, it causes impotence and gynecomastia. Because of its action on testosterone receptors, it causes impotence and gynecomastia. This spironolactone also causes hyperkalemia, abdominal pain, and it also causes increased peptic ulcers also. Then we have eplerenone. Eplerenone also has many drug interactions because of its action on metabolic enzymes. Okay, next we have renin-angiotensin system. We will learn this renin-angiotensin system in our next class. Thank you guys for watching my lecture. Thank you.